In the last days, the leader of Russia will make war against the nation of Israel in an epic battle that takes place on Israel's northern hills. Iran, Turkey, Libya, and Sudan will join forces with Russia in an effort to destroy the nation of Israel once and for all. Europe and Saudi Arabia will question Russia and her allies, but their protest will fall on deaf ears. This Russian-led coalition will come upon Israel with a massive army of troops and attack the Jewish state. No nation on earth will come to Israel's aid. But when it seems like Israel is totally helpless against her enemies, God will intervene. He will send a massive earthquake in the land of Israel. Then he will send them a terrible disease and cause confusion among them so that they start destroying each other instead of Israel. And finally, he will devastate Israel's enemies with rain, hailstones, and fire and brimstone. Then many who are apathetic about God will know the power of the one true God who defends and protects his holy nation, Israel. I know what you're thinking. Does the Bible really say this will happen? How could a book thousands of years old make a prediction about modern nations like Iran and Russia? The prophecy I just described is known by Christians as the Magog invasion. It's a prophecy that conservative Bible teachers and even politicians like Ronald Reagan believed will literally happen as predicted. What's crazy is that this battle will take place in the last days, right before Jesus returns. And according to many Christians, we've never been closer to this prophecy being fulfilled. Could this mean the beginning of the end of the world as we know it? Okay, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. If you're anything like me, then you're probably still a little bit skeptical right about now, which is why we need to go to the source of this prophecy.
The book of Ezekiel, chapter 38.
Ezekiel 38.
Ezekiel 38.
The Ezekiel 38 war.
This prophecy was written over 2,500 years ago by a man named Ezekiel, who was forced out of his homeland in Israel as a small child and taken to Babylon with the rest of the Hebrew captives. It was in captivity at age 13 that God started speaking directly to Ezekiel and telling him to write down messages that predicted the future. And one of these God-given prophecies is about a bunch of nations coming together to attack and destroy Israel. Listen to what Ezekiel writes. Now the word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks into your jaws, and lead you out with all your army, horses, and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, in a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all its troops, the house of Togarmah from the far north and all its troops, many people are with you. Now there are a lot of names mentioned in those first 6 verses that sound a little bit weird to you and me, but anyone living in Ezekiel's day would have known exactly who Ezekiel was writing about. Every name mentioned in Ezekiel 38 was a well-known nation in the 6th century BC, except for the name Gog, which we'll get into in a moment. Let's see if we can use history and archaeology to locate where each of these ancient nations were located on a map of the world in Ezekiel's time. Let's start with the first nation mentioned, Magog. The text itself says that Magog is located in the farthest parts north of Israel. Watch what happens when you draw a line from Israel to the country furthest north. You end up in what today is called Russia. In fact, the capital of Russia, Moscow, is almost exactly north of the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. But even after learning this, I was still skeptical. Who were the ancient people living in the land we call Russia today? And did anybody at the time know them as Magog? To answer this, we need to do some digging. Literally. Take a look at this ancient mummy. She is known as the Siberian Ice Princess and was found in the 1940s along with other ancient bodies fully preserved in southern Russia. Even their tattoos were preserved. Archaeologists believe that shortly after their burial, the tombs were flooded with rain that froze over, preserving the bodies along with many other artifacts all belonging to one ancient people group living in the land we know as Russia today. And guess what time period these artifacts are dated at? 2,500 years ago, which, if you remember, is the same time Ezekiel wrote his prophecy about Magog invading from the north. What's amazing is that artifacts like these have been found all across Russia. You can go today to the Hermitage Museum of St. Petersburg and find over 20,000 gold objects, all pointing back to the same ancient people living in the land we know as Russia. So who were these ancient people? They were called the Scythians, and many scholars believe that the Slavic tribes who later became the Russians were descendants of the Scythians. History tells us that they were expert archers who could hit any target with an arrow while riding backwards on a horse at full gallop. But one thing they weren't known for was mercy. The Greek historian Herodotus tells us that they were a brutal people, using their enemies' scalps as napkins and their skulls as cups from which they would drink their enemies' blood. If you were living in Ezekiel's day, just the name Scythian would have struck fear into your heart. But can you guess what other name the Scythians were known by? Listen to what the ancient historian Josephus writes. Magog founded the Magogians, but who were by the Greeks called Scythians. Many other historians also affirm this connection between the name Magog and the Scythians. With all of this evidence, we can confidently place Magog here. But what about the next name mentioned, Rosh? Take a look at this 10-sided cylinder found in the ancient city of Nineveh. This cylinder was inscribed for an Assyrian king who lived 100 years before Ezekiel. On it, the names of many nations are mentioned, including Rosh. In fact, the Assyrians weren't the only ones who knew about a place called Rosh. Other records, including Egyptian inscriptions, describe a place called Rosh located above the Black Sea in what is now modern-day Russia. Now, before we get to these other nations mentioned, we need to talk about this military leader the Bible calls Gog, G-O-G. The Bible calls this person the Prince of Rosh from the land of Magog. So based on what we just learned about Magog and Rosh being identified with the land we know as Russia, Gog must be a powerful dictator over this land with a large military at his disposal. Can you think of anyone today that fits this description? Okay, now I'm not saying that Putin is Gog. What I am saying is that if the Ezekiel 38 battle were to happen today, Putin would certainly fit the description of Gog. The important thing to know is that Gog is the title of a person, not a location. Just like we would use the word Tsar or Sultan, Gog is a title that means ruler. So now that we know who's leading this great army from the north, who are his allies? Well, the next names mentioned are Meshech and Tubal. These people were known as Mushki and Tabal by the Assyrians and Muskoi and Tiberenoi by the Greeks. I probably said that wrong. Anyways, the Assyrian inscriptions and Greek writings both place these people in the land of modern-day Turkey. Next up is Persia.
In 1971, Iran celebrates her 2,500th birthday as a nation, as a state, and as a monarchy.
What many don't know about Iran is that the country had been called Persia up until 1935. This is because the Iranians are the descendants of the Persians who in Ezekiel's day were slowly growing into a massive empire that would end up controlling most of the ancient Near Eastern world. In fact, most Persian people today don't even like being called Iranians. They prefer to be called Persians, or so I've been told by my Persian friends. So we can definitely place Persia here. Now take a look at this clay engraving found in ancient Persia. You guys, when I found this, it seriously blew my mind. This is an engraving from 513 BC, right after the time that Ezekiel lived, and it is a picture of the Persians at war with the Scythians, who we already discovered was Magog. When I did a little more digging, I learned that these kingdoms were each other's arch enemies and constantly at war with one another. In fact, the Persian king Darius chased the Scythians all across Russia until finally giving up. Now this made me think, if Ezekiel were just making up this prophecy, why would he write that the Persians would become allies with the Scythians when they hated each other? Fast forward 2,500 years and here we are. The Russians, who are the descendants of the Scythians, and the Iranians, who are the descendants of the Persians, are close allies today. Iran currently provides Russia with drones to assist in their war against the Ukrainians, and Russia has been providing Iran with weapons for decades. But this shouldn't shock us. the Bible told us they'd become allies. Next up is Ethiopia and Libya. Now the name Ethiopia can be a little misleading because the original Hebrew doesn't say Ethiopia, it uses the ancient name Cush. They were known as the Kusu in Assyrian and Kos in Egyptian, and these ancient records place them directly south of Egypt, extending down to modern-day Khartoum. Libya is also a different word in the biblical Hebrew. The word used is put. However, the name Libya isn't misleading since ancient writings, including Babylonian inscriptions and multiple verses in the Hebrew Bible, place these people in the land we call Libya today. The last allies of Magog are pretty easy to place: Gomer and the house of Togomar. Gomer is a reference to Kimmer, who were known as the Cimmerians. At the time of Ezekiel writing, records show that the Cimmerian people occupied modern-day Turkey. Now, Togarmah was a well-known city established by the Hittites on the border of Tubal, which we already mentioned is in modern-day Turkey. Okay guys, now look at this map and remember that in Ezekiel's day, all of these groups were at war with one another and had limited communication. If you were an ancient Hebrew captive in Babylon, reading the Ezekiel 38 prophecy, you would have laughed at what must have seemed like nonsense. But watch what happens when you convert this ancient map into a modern one for today. Russia is becoming more and more of a dictatorship, and Putin is forming deeper alliances with each of the nations mentioned in Ezekiel. Today, this prophecy doesn't sound so crazy anymore. Wait a second, I almost forgot. There's still one nation that we haven't talked about yet, and it's actually the most important one because it's this nation that the Russian-led coalition is going to attack. These next few verses describe this nation in great detail, and honestly, my skeptical mind was blown when I read them. But before I do, if you want to be able to read your Bible with confidence and stop feeling confused like I did when I started reading the Bible, then I want to encourage you to download my 10-minute guide, which will help you study key words in your Bible without ever having to learn Greek or Hebrew. You can download it for free in the description below. Okay, now check this out. This is what Ezekiel writes. You will ascend, coming like a storm, covering the land like a cloud, you and all your troops, and many peoples with you, to take plunder and to take booty, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited, and against a people gathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. So the nation being attacked is one that had long been desolate, but was regathered from every nation. What is the only nation on earth that has ceased from being a nation, whose people were scattered across the entire world and then miraculously, after 2,000 years, regathered back into her homeland, just like the Bible said would happen? The prophecy also states that this nation will be a wealthy nation that other nations will want to plunder. Okay, check out this 1998 newspaper that my dad gave me. Half a century after the Zionist dream came true, the Jewish state has emerged as a modern, prosperous member of the world community. Goes on to talk about all of the amazing achievements Israel was able to achieve in only 50 years of becoming a nation. You guys, when Ezekiel 38 was written, the Israelites were literal slaves living in captivity in Babylon. Who could have predicted Israel, a country the size of New Jersey, would become one of the wealthiest nations in the entire region, leading the way in technology and agriculture? But in order for this prophecy to happen, all of the previous nations mentioned, Russia, Turkey, Iran, Sudan, and Libya, will need to be motivated to attack Israel. So what are these nations saying about Israel today?
Iran continuing to issue new threats against Israel.
Crowds celebrate in Tehran to show support for Hamas's attack on Israel this Saturday.
Israel, you are an occupier. You are an organized gang. Israel is committing war crimes.
Tehran has become a key ally for Moscow at Israel's expense, fostering economic and military ties with Iran, while Tehran provides the Russian army with scores of Shahed drones.
It is illegal to normalize ties with Israel under a 1957 law in Libya, which has long been hostile toward Israel. The Prime Minister has rejected the prospect of normalizing relations with Israel.
Meanwhile, in Turkey, thousands marched in Istanbul in support of the Palestinians.
When we heard that the Hamas attacked Israel, we wanted to support them.
Each one of these countries have not been shy about their hatred for this little Jewish state. If given the opportunity, they would take Israel out. Okay, this next verse in Ezekiel 38 is really interesting and once again lines up perfectly with the times we're living in. Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and all her young lions will say to you, have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to take away silver and gold? To take away livestock and goods? To take great plunder? In other words, whoever Sheba, Dedan, and Tarshish are, they're going to question the Russian-led coalition, but ultimately won't do anything to help Israel. Many scholars place Sheba and Dedan in the land we know today as Saudi Arabia. Listen to what the president of Israel said about Israel's relations with Saudi Arabia right before the 2023 Gaza war broke out.
Now look at what happens when we make peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. The whole Middle East changes. We tear down the walls of enmity.
Isn't it interesting that although Saudi Arabia has historically been against Israel, they have now begun to move towards peace?
And Saudi Arabia is normalizing its relations with Israel.
The merchants of Tarshish and their young lions is the last nation we need to place. And I gotta be honest with you, this one was a little tricky. Scholars are actually divided on where this is. But since we know from the Bible that Tarshish was a sea trading land in the far north, and we know from history that the ancient Wessex people enjoyed trade from the eastern Mediterranean as early as 1500 BC, I think it's safe to place Tarshish on the island of Britain. This would make the young lions the various colonies that Britain has planted, which could be a veiled reference for the United States, but it's a stretch. Once I was able to locate each nation through history and archaeology, and once I saw the alliances that these nations had with one another, combined with their mutual hate for Israel today, it became very clear to me that we are closer than ever to this Magog invasion described in Ezekiel chapter 38 actually taking place. Now, no one knows exactly when this battle will take place, but twice the prophecy states that it will happen in the last days. If you have not given your life to Jesus Christ, then do not delay 1 second more, because it is clear that we are living in the end times.